So as Jason said, I'm Kenneth Capesius, common mispronunciation. And I was the Jeffries fellow in Whistleblower Litigation. So I worked at the Simmer Law Group, a small law firm in Washington, D.C. And there I took a picture the very first day at the law firm. President Obama made an appearance. Well, at least his cutout did. So we'll start with Simmer Law Group. So it was founded a little over a year ago. It'd be a year and 5 months now. It was started by Scott Simmer, who graduated from Cornell in '73. His firm is currently at 4 attorneys, himself and 3 others. One of them actually works from Minnesota, so I had a lot of phone calls with him, and then the other 3 attorneys, including Scott, are actually in their DC office. So they work in whistleblower litigation, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. The office that I actually worked at was in one of the Watergate buildings. So Watergate is a complex of buildings, and his office was in Watergate 600. Not the one that the scandal happened at, but in the same complex. So what is whistleblower litigation? In the field, it's known as key tom litigation, and what it is anytime a company is trying to defraud the government in some way. So the example that I'll use is how we came to have this field of law. Around the Civil War, and that's why I have a picture of Lincoln there, the False Claims Act was passed. Now what this act did was it authorized individuals to bring lawsuits on behalf of the U.S. government against companies. So during the Civil War, the U.S. government had different companies provide food and other goods to the armies, to the Union Army. And what would happen is these companies, a company might provide, say, 40 sacks of flour, but then they would charge the government for 50. So what this act allowed them to do is, if individuals came to realize this distinction between the two, they could bring a lawsuit on behalf of the government to return those funds that were illegally charged to the government. So that's the big part of this is it's individual people, but they're working on behalf of the government to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are being used appropriately and not given to companies who don't actually deserve them. So my project at Simmer Law Group mostly was research. A lot of the work I did was helping the attorneys in the early stages of their cases research past cases or the current law for the case they were working on to see if there was a case and how they should proceed with it. In addition to that, my main project, as it says there, is to write a judicial opinion. So one of the cases that the firm was working on, the company had moved to dismiss the case, essentially telling the judge, even if what they're saying is true, the law doesn't allow them to bring this suit against us. So what I did was I worked with Scott Simmer, who was my site mentor, to write a judicial opinion on this. So I looked at the facts and the arguments of both sides. I researched the law, and then with Scott acting as the judge and me as his law clerk, we wrote an opinion together, we edited the opinion, and tried to come up with what we thought was the correct legal solution to the problem. The other work I did in addition to research, once I'd done the research, I would compile it into memos and summaries, timelines, charts, and provide that to the attorneys so that they could use in the case and present to their clients to show what kind of work was being done on their case. So this is a picture of my office space at Simmer Law Group. About where I'm standing is where the paralegal, Helen, was working, and she did a lot to help me get settled in and figure out what I needed to do to be successful and help the lawyers at the firm. So what I learned, the main part of my project and what I wanted to discover is what the everyday work of a lawyer was like. It's one thing for all of us to sit on our couches, watch Law and Order, and decide, oh, I know what an attorney does. They just go to court every day and they argue with the judge. Well, that's not what most attorneys do. I discovered that most attorneys focus their work on research and writing a lot of documents. A lot of a lawyer's work has to do with writing. And that's one thing that I discovered while I was there, is I did a lot of that myself. I also found what it takes to be a successful attorney. As Jason has mentioned a couple times, I think tonight, all of us fellows had to write a post-fellowship paper. So what I did for Dr. Craig Allen, my faculty sponsors, I used this book, The Good Lawyer, which I read and then did a comparison of what the book talked about compared to my experience. So the book tried to walk through different factors that the authors believed good lawyers needed to have. So an example would be compassion and empathy, being able to place yourself in someone else's shoes and see the problem from their point of view. And what I did was I compared all of their attributes to what I had saw at the firm and discovered that a lot of those kind of nitty-gritty details that law school doesn't necessarily focus on, such as compassion, interpersonal skills, those are all very critical to the work that lawyers do every day. And last, but probably most importantly, is I learned what it's like to live in a large city. I'm from a farm that's about an hour east of here, and the town that's closest to us is about 200 people. So Washington, D.C. is a little bit different from that, and what this internship, this fellowship allowed me to do is discover what it's like to live in a bigger city. So there's a picture on the right. The main way that I got around was using the metro, which public transportation was a new thing for me, moving to a substantially larger city. So academically, this internship allowed me to improve my analytical skills, and most importantly, and what I got the most practice in, was to improve my research skills, how to be efficient and effective in researching topics. There are certain skills and tricks that I learned while at Simmer Law Group that I've been able to carry over into my work this year and my work in the future. And in the future, what the fellowship did was it affirmed that I do want to become an attorney, that law is something that I think I'm destined to do and work in. And this fellowship in particular will give me an edge in applying to law school. It's something that I can put on my resume, I can talk about with the law school admissions teams, and say this is something that most of your applicants probably don't have, something that I can offer this law school. The professional impact, I gained an understanding, at least on a basic level, of legal writing. Legal writing is very different from what Christina was talking about with creative writing or factual writing that we see in a lot of textbooks. Legal writing involves arguments, but you can't just argue any particular way. There are certain methods, certain manners in which you need to present your argument to be successful, and those are things that I learned. I used as part of that Harvard Blue Book rules. So that's how lawyers refer to other cases that have been decided in the past, or other laws or legal authorities that help present their argument. I learned how to use some of those rules in presenting my arguments. And last but certainly not least, it gave me an opportunity to work with not only the attorneys in the firm, but with other firms in DC. For example, I had lunch one day with Scott Simmer and John McGrain, who's the current chair of the Board of Trustees. So it gave me a chance to network and get to know what his work was like and how that differed from a smaller law firm that Scott Simmer worked at. So McGrain, for example, works at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius, which is the 4th largest law firm in the world. So it has thousands of attorneys, very different from a 4-attorney firm that I worked at. So last, I want to offer some thanks here to my site supervisor, Scott Simmer, who was unable to make it today. That's a picture of Scott and I at Navy Memorial Stadium. That was one thing that he did a good job of helping me with, is not only in the workplace, but getting around DC and exploring opportunities that the surrounding areas had to offer me. I want to thank my faculty sponsor, Dr. Craig Allen, who's also my academic advisor and has done a lot for me over the past 4 years to get me to where I am today. And Cornell's Fellows Program, but in particular, R.J. Holmes Leopold, who was critical in bringing about this fellowship. I'm the first fellow to actually work at Simmer Law Group, and R.J. worked very closely with Scott to help set this fellowship up and make it happen. It's an opportunity that I know I will carry with me for the rest of my legal career and the rest of my life. So thank you.